Yeah, welcome to this podcast. We are joined today by Professor Ishtiaq Ahmed, who is a Swedish political scientist and author of Pakistani descent. Professor Ahmed holds a PhD in political science from Stockholm University and is also Professor Emeritus of Political Science at Stockholm University. He is also the Honorary Senior Fellow at the Institute of South Asian Studies, Singapore, and is currently visiting professor at Government College, University Lahore during the spring term. Professor Ahmed has authored over 9 books, but altogether he has to his credit 14 books because some of his books have been translated. And some of his books are The Punjab Bloodied, Partition and Cleansed, which was published by Oxford University Press, Pakistan, the Garrison States, Origins, Evolution and Consequences, which was also published by Oxford University Press. Welcome to this podcast, Professor Ahmed.
Thank you very much. Let me just add that the Punjab Bloodied, Partition and Cleansed was first published by Rupa Publications, New Delhi in 2011. And recently they have come up with a new edition to mark the 75 years of the partition, 2022. So this was published in both India and Pakistan. And then one book you have not mentioned and which has actually uh, made me well known throughout India and Pakistan is Jinnah, His Successes, Failures and Role in History, published by Penguin Random House uh, India and Vanguard Books Lahore. And recently, the Urdu translation was also published by Vanguard Books. Okay, so I'll complete the important books that you have mentioned.
Yeah. Thank you, sir, for pointing out the third book,
Yeah.
which is sort of. So, sir, I come now to my first question, which is, about your personal journey. And so you were, born in Lahore, Pakistan. So, sir, why don't you, go back to your early childhood days and then tell us as to what was the motivation of, like specifically choosing political science at the undergrad level, and then you've, gone on to get your PhD in political science. And in doing so, sir, it would be great if you can highlight any political scientist that left an imprint on you, Professor. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Malhar Singh, for this question. Well, I'm sure you know that when we started school, nobody thought we'll end up as political scientists or historians or doctors. I
Yeah.
remember at that time, parents wanted children either to be doctors or engineers.
Yeah.
It's only over the years when you go to school, then college, then finally you find your talent or your interest is in a different direction and you end up becoming a political scientist. So I would not claim that I was from day one aiming to become a political scientist. This never occurred to me. But as I grew up in Lahore, politics was always being discussed around me, and it was always something which uh, whetted my curiosity. It was something which fascinated me. So as I moved up, political science became the subject in which I found myself more at home. And then in 1970, I got the highest marks in MA Political Science from Punjab University. And so that's my journey. About any political scientist who may have influenced me,
Yeah.
well, I have had teachers like there was at FC College Lahore, my teacher, uh, William Fazal Masih, an Punjabi Christian gentleman who took a great interest in my education. And but he died very young in a bus accident outside Multan. So that's a tragedy that I remember always. Then at Punjab University, Professor Khalid Mahmood
Mm-hmm.
must be mentioned as my mentor, who made me think away from traditional political science and towards the Marxist paradigm
Mhm.
of looking at society. So these two, when it comes to political science, I would like to remember with a lot of uh, gratitude.
Okay. So any contemporary political scientist that you know sort of admire in the present era?
Well, people admire me a lot, so I don't know who should I be admiring. There are many. I mean, let me not.
Oh,
Uh, yes, I think there are many, and we are all at the top of our careers. So, in my formative phase, of course, I found reading classics like the one on Plato and Aristotle.
okay.
So I say that Plato is the founder of political theory and Aristotle the founder of political science.
Okay.
These are two different approaches. And
Okay.
then as you move forward, you have many others who profoundly influence you, including the social contract theorists.
Yeah. Yeah.
Machi-
Yeah.
Machiavelli was someone I found fascinating.
Yeah.
And then as you move further in time, Karl Marx is always there,
Yeah. 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 We will get it.
J.S. Mill is there. So, I mean, one can't mention
Yeah.
any one particular political scientist. But Bertrand Russell, I would say, although he was a mathematician, but he was also into uh, politics and explaining politics. And he also, I found very uh, interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. And so the beauty of political science is it's actually cut across economics as such.
Yes, 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 of
So,
course.
so yeah, so I come, sir, to my next question, which is more of a generic question, and it, sort of brings both economics and political science, together.
Yes,
The study of political science is linked to, socio-economic outcomes. And this
right.
applies both to, the advanced Western countries and developing countries such as India and Pakistan. And so, um, one political science concept which is sort of the hallmark of how a capitalist society is supposed to operate is institutions. uh,
Mm.
and so institutions are a set of formal rules, which is, when you say formal rules, that means constitutions. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, sir. And
Yes,
then,
yes,
then there are informal, norms, which are cultural norms, if I'm correct.
yes,
And then there
right.
is, shared understanding that, that political actors, have to operate within, these two. So, sir, why
Yeah.
don't you identify any one formal rule and informal rule which, differ in South Asia? And we are talking of India and Pakistan here from other regions of the world, given that, you have like lived across, many different, yeah.
Yes, well, maybe it's easier to compare and contrast the Western systems and the rest, I think, because what happens in India and Pakistan would be similar in many other parts of Asia and even Africa. But comparing with the Western systems, I think the state and society developed dialectically in
Yeah,
interaction with each other.
yeah,
So it was popular demands for rights and for change, which compelled the rulers to make changes, more towards democracy, constitutionalism, and so on.
yeah,
In the case of the subcontinent, I think there was an advanced, more educated uh, body of leaders, especially in India, uh, who whose ideas were based on Western notions of democracy, liberalism, inclusion, pluralism,
yeah,
and so the society, the state elite which founded modern India was more advanced than the society that they were trying to change. So many of the changes which came in India came from the top. Like nobody actually went out to struggle for the right of vote. I
yeah,
don't remember any such movement being launched by the people. It was the leadership which gave many of these rights, even the idea of a constitution.
Yeah.
was borrowed from the Western practices. And I think the same for Pakistan, although the difference is that Pakistan decided to be an ideological state. Uh, so there is a incongruence between the state elite, if we can call it,
Uh-huh.
and the society in general. The society is still very much conservative, traditional, although some people argue that India could become a secular state because Hindus are more amenable to a secular world
Yeah.
order
Yeah.
than others. So maybe that is unique about India.
Yeah.
But in the case of Pakistan, one would then argue that secularism didn't have a very strong basis among Muslims, and that is one reason why Pakistan uh, was from day one uh, a poor candidate for a secular type of. But in both societies, there was a discrepancy between the leaders who wanted to bring modern change, and the society's own rhythm was very different.
Okay. And sir, to talk more about the institutions, what
Yes.
role you think that the political actors have played
Well,
in
I think
yeah.
in India, the guarantee for uh, a secular state is your constitution, which even the BJP, which is a Hindu nationalist party, has to uh, submit to. Because I remember in 1996, when Mr. Vajpayee first got the opportunity to form a government,
Yeah.
he tried for about 13, 17 days, but gave up, saying that democracy is a game of numbers and we don't have the numbers with us. So that was an excellent, uh, or I think a classic statement in support of the institutions established by the Indian Constitution. And I think that still is quite robust in India, although some people are complaining that changes are being made and that secular state may be under threat and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought I will point that out. But in Pakistan, uh, institutions never mattered from day one. They were flouted, blatantly violated by those who came to power, like Mr. Jinnah. He
Mm-hmm.
became the Governor General and not
Mm-hmm.
Prime Minister.
Mm-hmm.
But as Governor General, he exercised powers which even the viceroys didn't have. And he dismissed elected governments and made statements which came to haunt Pakistan. So India and Pakistan are two different cases.
Mm-hmm.
India institutions are entrenched,
Mm-hmm.
and violating them is not easy. It
Mm-hmm.
happens, of course. The emergency is a case in point,
Mm-hmm.
but it was corrected in time then. But in Pakistan, institutions have never mattered. The only institution which is strong and whose will prevails is the Pakistan military or Pakistan army, and to a certain extent the bureaucracy. But
Yeah.
those are supposed to serve the state, not the government in power, and not rule, but they do in Pakistan.
Okay. So, sir, when let's say an economist talks about institutions, they do it from the perspective of how does institutions the rules of the game help you to separate what is yours against vis-a-vis others, right? What is my property, right? So, in that context, Professor, what are your thoughts on the fact that institutions have sort of helped the Indian economy take on the trajectory that is had, I mean that it did after 1991, right? So how closely linked is economic institutions to the political institutions, right? Both of them sort of feed into each other.
They do. I totally endorse that point of view.
Yeah.
India decided to be a, a sort of free market economy with a strong presence of the state in regulating the economy.
Yeah.
And therefore, in the 1990s, when they realized that the old system, state license
Yes.
system doesn't work,
Yeah.
they opened up. And it's not the BJP who started all this. It was, I think, uh, Narasimha Rao and Manmohan Singh who started these processes.
Yes.
And so I think the two have worked together. It's a market economy,
Yeah.
uh, a capitalist economy, but one in which the state is required to intervene to see to it that some sort of justice is maintained. Now people are saying that that is under threat, but I don't know. I thought I'll just make this observation. Uh, so that's it.
Yeah. And so, sir, why do you think this has not happened in the case of Pakistan till yet? The
I told
economic
you that
institutions.
Pakistan from day one had no vision on which to found Pakistan as a political system. They had ideas of an Islamic state, and another was a Muslim democracy, a spiritual democracy. And some say that Jinnah finally wanted a secular state, which I think is all rubbish because he made just one such speech and then reverted to Islam being important to the politics and law and constitution of Pakistan. So they have not, for them, it's not been clear what institutions to establish, what sort of constitution to have, which is both Islamic and democratic. What we find it is that it's a mix of both, but as a result, it is neither fish nor fowl. That's Pakistan's problem.
So, you would you make the case then that because the political institution was not like firmly entrenched, that sort of has not aided in the economic institutions, helping Pakistan to come up, the economic ranks.
Well, it's not as simple as that. The institutions were never strong, never uh, deeply rooted from day one. But when the military took over in 58,
Mm-hmm.
they got a lot of aid from the World Bank and America to
Yeah.
establish a pro-capitalist economy, and for a while they did very well.
Okay.
Pakistan's rate of growth was 5.3% and India's 2.7%.
Yeah.
But then they started the 65 war, and my argument has been that from that time onwards,
Uh-huh.
that chance of industrializing,
Uh-huh.
not everywhere democracy and all really matters. After all, Singapore,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. China is
South
a classic
Africa,
case.
yeah, they have made fantastic economic
Yes.
gains without being democratic.
Yes.
So this linkage people make is only one of the possibilities. The two are not necessarily dependent on one another.
Yes.
But if they come together, then there is a balance between democracy
Yes.
and a successful economy, which is the best.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Thank you, sir. So I come, sir, to my next question, which is,
Yeah.
when I bring up, the concept of Marxism, and
Yes.
also, the struggle which, took place in the 20th century, known as Cold War, which was nothing but a competition between communism and capitalism.
Yes.
So, so the Communist Manifesto, it did, highlight that the system, the capitalist system, was actually unstable because it sort of exploited the last section of working class, right? And so that sort of was the breeding ground for what took place in Russia, known as the Russian Revolution, and the spread of communism. So yeah, so why don't you like enlighten us about what happened prior to the Russian Revolution and then like during the spread of communism in China.
So, what is your question?
So my question is, so why don't you tell us about the rise of communism, which led
Yes.
to the Russian Revolution, and
Yeah.
also the communism was spearheaded in China also by the Chinese communists.
Yes. Well, it's a big question to begin with.
Yeah.
Marx, primarily, but also Engels, developed this idea of uh, historical materialism and
Dialectical
dialectical
materialism. Yeah.
materialism. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
saying that society moves forward because of the unity and struggle between opposites.
Yeah.
And uh, Marx would then talk about once upon a time, a society without classes, primitive sort of communism, where people lived by the day, without being uh, divided into classes. But then, through the invention of tools and organized agriculture, a
Mm-hmm.
surplus began to be produced,
Mm-hmm.
and that resulted in society being divided by between those who were clever and strong, who started owning the means of production,
Mm-hmm.
and they forced the others to work for them to
Mm-hmm.
produce surplus.
Mm-hmm.
And Marx would then argue in the Communist Manifesto and Engels
Mm-hmm.
that then society became divided into slave owners and slaves, which later on, because of the conflict between the two, the
Mm-hmm.
unity and struggle of the opposites
Mm-hmm.
finally resulted in more technological changes taking place. So instead of 1,000 slaves, you needed only maybe 50 peasants to work with the plow to
Yeah.
produce a surplus. So
Yeah.
it led to feudalism.
Yeah.
And then he says that technological changes are the basis for change in society, and this continues all the time.
Uh-huh.
And the next change was that people started inventing machines. And
Uh-huh.
with the machines coming over, the large scale production became possible.
Uh-huh.
And that resulted in factory or mill level productions where you had hundreds and thousands of workers doing a simple task to produce one product. And that is the capitalist system. And
Mm-hmm.
Marx, the way he argued was that from the changes take place first quantitatively and then they become qualitative, and that's when the new society emerges.
Mm-hmm.
And working on this assumption,
Mm-hmm.
he said that capitalism would also go under because a few monopoly capitalists will own everything and force the middle class into the working class, and then there will be a popular revolution in the most advanced parts of the world,
Mm-hmm.
Germany and England, especially, he mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
And so socialism will come into place, and then socialism will be built. It will be a worldwide process,
Mm-hmm.
and everywhere socialism will start producing goods on a large scale, and then society will become a society of abundance. People
Okay.
will be able to produce things in abundance, and therefore there would be no need for classes to be created. Like automation will take over, artificial intelligence in one way.
Yeah.
Marx anticipated that robots will be doing so many tasks.
Yeah.
So, but the problem is that was a very elegant formula that he introduced. He said
Yeah.
even in nature,
Yeah.
nature also is this dialectical materialism. A seed becomes a plant, and then a plant goes under and a new thing emerges. Things like this,
Yeah.
partly borrowed from Hegel, but also given material
Uh,
background. So that was the way they thought the world will ultimately change until all classes will be abolished and the whole world community will become one free people. There would be no workers and no rulers. There would be
uh,
no state, no police, no nothing.
yeah.
Now the thing is, as a as a as a grand mega theory, it's fascinating,
Yeah.
and it captured my youth as it did of so many other people.
Yes.
But now the thing is, in practice, this is not what happened.
Yes.
Already, the Russians started arguing that uh, we can make a revolution not until all Russians become workers, but even
Yes.
when it's a peasant society, and we can have a vanguard party which can capture the state, and then the peasants can be organized to create socialism.
Yeah.
And during the First World War, Lenin was able to capture power and establish the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union was declared as the citadel of world communism, and they had to fight a bloody civil war, and
Yeah.
Western powers were occupying the Soviet Union. So into the 30s, that struggle kept on uh, going on.
Yeah.
But finally, the Soviet Union under Joseph Stalin was consolidated.
Yeah.
But then came the Second World War,
Yeah.
and once again the Soviet Union had to face the brunt of fascism and Nazism, especially Nazism, which is rabidly anti-communist, and the Soviet Union could never become what was to be called a democratic sort of society. It was centrally controlled, maybe over-controlled, overly controlled.
Okay.
And some accuse Stalin of creating even totalitarianism.
Okay.
But anyhow, they were able to build a functioning system and defeat
Yeah.
the Germans.
Yeah.
This argument that a vanguard party can lead without the workers being a major portion of the society was then used by Mao, saying that in China, it's not even the working class, but the peasantry, the most
Yeah.
exploited, who can be the leading class.
Yeah.
So he was able to build Soviet communism.
Yes.
Sorry, Chinese communism through people's struggle rather than the working
They
class
call
struggle.
it communism with Chinese characteristics. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
So in both these societies, you found communism as a dogma being uh, instituted by the state. There was a constitution promising everything,
Yeah.
but the state control was total. And I think there is a problem when there's a state control and the rulers, even with the best intentions, don't know what the people want.
Yeah.
The lack of communication can create frustration among the people.
Yes.
And the Soviet system collapsed, and the Chinese, what they did was they just retained the Communist Party's complete control,
Yes.
but have made China a very successful capitalist society with a strong state being partner in it.
Yes.
That's what has happened. And as compared to this, there was the old social democratic movement that socialism can also be built by democratic means.
Yes.
And that was the thesis of Bernstein and Kautsky and all these people in Germany.
Okay.
And I think the social democratic Scandinavian countries are an example of socialism being built by democratic means. Although now, even that system is overtaken by the globalization or neoliberal capitalism, but still the welfare state is well entrenched.
Okay. So, sir, would you argue then that communism or socialism, they were simply not able to compete with the capitalist way of society?
It seems they failed in that.
So, sir, so would you attribute the failure of the socialism to lack of how the political main players, they sort of so would you attribute the failure to lack of their understanding of how they should have operated, or was it due to the capitalist system being overly better, like they were the capitalist?
No, I think first of all there was no model or template they could follow. They had to do everything from a scratch.
Okay.
And already the idea of making a revolution in not the most advanced parts of the world, but in a peripheral part, which is Tsarist Russia, was a break with what Marx had been saying, that quantity changes into quality, and Germany would be, or England, where the revolution would come. So there was a deviation. And let me point out that Marx himself corrected his historical materialism when he came to China and India. He said that these societies were not based on private property being owned by some and denied by others, but by a state monopolizing all surplus. And therefore, he called it the Asiatic mode of production. So already in Marx, there is an admission that historical materialism, whatever he understood, applied to Western history and not Asia or Africa and India and so on. So already you find Marx conceding that outside Europe, things were, or outside the Western world, things were very different.
Okay.
Okay. And then Lenin makes a revolution which is not exactly quantity changing into quality, but capturing power in the name of the working class through a vanguard party and trying to build socialism. I
Okay.
think they were quite successful in eliminating poverty, in giving everybody a right to go to school, uh,
Yeah.
uh, subsidized housing, very cheap,
Yeah.
excellent medical, all those things did, but they failed in giving people a sense of freedom.
Yeah.
Everything was subject to state control.
Yeah.
And I think that created a lot of frustration among young people who were not part of the revolution and the sacrifices of the earlier generations. For
Yeah.
them, the Western world was free and they did things as they wanted, individuals.
Yeah.
In Soviet Russia, that was not possible.
Okay.
And in China, I think what they have done is that they have been trying to eliminate poverty, but any democratic opposition is crushed. And
Yeah.
thus far, they have been successful.
Yes.
So that's how things have been in China and then in Soviet Russia. But what I'm saying is
Yeah.
that the old Soviet or Marxist method of historical materialism,
Yeah.
already in the life of Marx, he admitted this didn't apply outside the Western
Yeah.
historical experience.
Yeah.
And then Lenin and then Mao changed
Yeah.
basically the basic argument of quantity changing into quality and so on and so forth. The vanguard, dictatorship of the proletariat was just a name. It was dictatorship of the Politburo. And
Yes.
I'm not saying that the Politburo did not serve the people. They did a lot for the people
Yeah.
of Russia. They
Yeah.
brought people from all over the world, gave them free education, made them doctors, engineers,
Yeah.
and the Soviet state especially helped the freedom struggles of Asia and Africa a lot. I
Yeah.
don't think the Chinese have done much for the freedom struggle of the world,
Yeah.
but the Soviet state did. So
Yes.
they have made fantastic contributions uh, to the freedom of the world, but
Yeah.
themselves, they were not able to let citizens travel easily,
Yeah.
marry, I mean, go from one place to another, and that doesn't work, I tell you.
Yeah. You said that Marx was, he admitted, that his sort of method did not apply to, the Asia
Yeah.
region. So any audience, if they want to trace that reference to, where can they trace that to? Is it in a book or like,
No, it's a huge book, The
okay,
Asiatic Mode of Production. It's a
okay,
huge work of Marx.
Marx,
Yes,
okay,
yes, yes.
okay. Yeah, Professor Ahmed. So I now come to, the Weberian definition of, class, which consists of classifying class only in terms of the labor market relations. So to substantiate this, the working class is defined as a seller of raw labor power, the middle class as seller of skilled labor power, and the capitalist class as purchasers of labor power. So, Professor, is this characterization adequate, or are there other ways that classes are defined from a political science perspective? For instance, classes are not defined in terms of categories of occupation, but also in terms of social relations of control over investments, decision making, other people's work, and one's own work. Yeah, sir. Why don't you throw light here?
No, first of all, the way I've read Max Weber, besides this way of describing classes,
Yeah.
he adds two more things. He says a class is also known by status and by the power. So he
Okay.
doesn't just have the economic definition. He says not Marxism misses the point that status plays a very important role, as well as the power you enjoy when in a position of power. So
Okay.
his idea of class includes these social relations, political influence, all that is included. So I understand Weber differently. And I think what you have elaborated then is also uh, not necessarily against what Weber has said, but only shows that as we move forward in, uh, you know, development of industrial society, modern economy,
Yeah.
new type of classes relations emerge.
With
And
specialization.
yes, specialization.
Yeah.
And I think that would be, for Weber, would be acceptable. So I think you have to look at his emphasis on status uh, and class. For example, let me make it a very simple example. A poor Brahmin would still have a lot of uh, status and even maybe power
Mm-hmm.
than a Dalit who is, comparable to his position economically, or even is a superior power holder formally.
Mm-hmm.
So status, I think, is also important in a society. And you know, senior professors have a lot of power and status, and they operate more or less like uh, feudal, people when they run their setup. So I think Weber needs to be understood in that context as well.
Okay. So one question is that do you think that that sort of class, analysis is sort of like more applicable in today's time when your profession sort of depends upon the specialization of your knowledge, skill set, and all those things come into the picture, and status sort of is no longer that relevant in today's time. It's more about
Well, I don't know where are we talking about today's time, because status still plays a very important role. Even in the Western world, there are these old aristocratic families whose influence is far greater than the actual ownership of property, or most of them are property owners and so on.
Okay.
So uh, I think as we democratize, as more people move up,
Yeah.
the old order will start losing its grip. But we are still far away from it, you
Okay.
know. But no doubt, the modern world, as we create more wealth, more people are pulled out of poverty
Yeah.
and become part of the middle class, the old order will start changing. This is true.
Okay. And so do you see this happening anywhere in the world? You think India is a classic case where this is starting to
Yes, I
happen?
think in India, uh, many people are, making careers as entrepreneurs after getting a good education. India
Yeah.
has been successful in providing sound education even to people in schools, in villages, faraway villages.
Yeah.
While in India recently, I met several who came from very humble backgrounds,
Yeah.
and they said we didn't even have a water tap in our home, but now we are owners of IT industries, and the turnover is 14 crore every year. Now, that's an amazing number. Of
Yeah.
course, these would be a handful of people, but as they rise, new people, new jobs are created, and they are pulled out of the old order. So, this is happening everywhere in the world. Nothing is constant and stable. Look at Saudi Arabia now being forced to give up its old, uh, you know, hardcore Islamism in favor of some sort of modern state and with freedoms and so on.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure another totalitarian type of system, Iran, will also undergo such change. So the world is changing for the better in
Mm.
many ways of the world. What we are not taking care of is not just the social aspect, but environment and climate change that seems to be neglected.
Yes, absolutely. And Professor, come back to a paper that you wrote, which was titled "The Rise and Fall of Left and the Maoist Movements in Pakistan." So it was
Yes,
published in India Quarterly in the year 2010, right?
right,
There
right.
you sort of say that during the late 1960s and early 70s, Maoist ideas had gained considerable popularity and influence in the left politics and labor movement.
Yeah.
Sir, why don't you talk about this? Yes.
Well, when Pakistan came into being, while India became a sort of bourgeois democracy, Pakistan couldn't even become that. It became a state very hostile to any ideas of uh, socialism, secularism, trade unionism, and they were under attack from day one. And so the communists in Pakistan were always on the margins.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, the CID and the police were always pursuing them. It's too well known. In India, of course, they had to change their ways from armed revolution and Telangana and go for elections. And once they did that,
Mm-hmm.
they were able to form governments also. So, but in Pakistan, the state was from day one rabidly anti-socialist and anti-secular, and they smashed the left whenever they got a chance. But in the 1960s, when this India-China war
Yeah.
took place,
Mm-hmm.
uh, Pakistan got a chance now to establish some sort of understanding with China and China with Pakistan. And it was largely Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, the foreign minister, who paved the way for China Pakistan good relations. And then Bhutto Sahab fell out of favor with Ayub Khan and built his own Pakistan People's Party.
Mm-hmm.
And that People's Party, then after the breakup of Pakistan, came into power. But, you know, from the late 60s, when Ayub Khan fell from power and Yahya Khan was ruling, but the Pakistan's relations with China had improved already at that time. So a lot of Maoist literature began to be freely read in Pakistan. And I was one among many other young people who were fascinated by the idea of a revolution inspired by Mao's idea of a peasant uprising.
Mm-hmm.
And we joined the Mazdoor Kisan Party. There were other pro Mao influenced parties as well, and student organizations, NSF, NSO, and many others
Yeah.
who were trying to uh, go for a peasant type of revolution in Pakistan. And I think in the late 60s, actually early 70s, the Mazdoor Kisan Party even tried an armed uprising in the Northwest Frontier province, in Hashtnagar and these areas. And there were people killed on both sides. But then, with Mr. Bhutto in power,
Mm-hmm.
uh, when in December 1972, the Maoists tried to capture factories and mills and occupy them in
Mm-hmm.
uh, Punjab and in Karachi.
Mm-hmm.
Bhutto then ordered the police to go after them and they were smashed. And so, uh, but during these 2, 3 years, communism or Maoism became
Mm-hmm.
acceptable because Maoism fitted into Pakistan's anti-India sort of uh, uh, politics. So
Mm-hmm.
being a Maoist also meant that you were very anti-India, and that suited the state.
Mm-hmm.
So for a while they had a free hand, but as soon as they tried seriously to go for a revolution and resistance, let's say, the
Mm-hmm.
state came down and smashed them. So that was a very short period of Maoist uh, influence all over Pakistan, and it
Mm-hmm.
was crushed very badly.
Okay. So you talk about Maoist, feeding into Pakistan's anti-Indian narrative. So there was one
Yeah,
more, gentleman known as Gangadhar Adhikari, who was a
yeah,
prominent communist theoretician. Yeah,
yes.
so there is this famous Adhikari thesis also, where he said that, I mean, if I understand correctly, he said that India will break into, a small state, like disintegrate, but that obviously has not happened. So, yeah, why don't you talk, sir, about this?
Well, nobody knows why Adhikari and the Communist Party of India came up with this most silly thesis because it made no sense. You see, if you have read the thesis, primarily Adhikari identifies oppressed nationalities. And oppressed nationalities he counts as Bengalis, Sindhis, Marathis, Maharashtrians, Gujaratis. Everybody is an oppressed nationality who having the right of self-determination. But when it came to Punjab, there is no oppressed Punjabi nationality. Rather, he says that the Sikhs and Muslims are also oppressed nationalities. Now, first of all, the definition when it comes to the Sikhs and Muslims is based on religion. And the Punjabi Hindus are not mentioned in that because there is no Punjabi oppressed nationality having the right of self-determination, but Sikhs having and the Muslims having. Now that fitted in very well with what Jinnah was saying. The two-nation theory was already a part of politics and becoming popular because during the Second World War, Jinnah was supporting the British, the Congress were opposing it. And so Adhikari coming up with this thesis made no sense. And what they did was they compelled Muslim communists, that's a very strange word, communists who were Muslims to join the Muslim League so that the Muslim League campaign can become a progressive sort of Islamic socialism campaign. Who advised them from where? Some say that the Soviet Union wanted them to take up such a position because in the 1930s, Stalin and others had come to the conclusion that India cannot have a revolution, socialist revolution, because Gandhi's teaching were non-violent and that was for compromise. So India will not have an armed revolution. Maybe Pakistan with its jihad and all could become a socialist. This was the most absurd sort of thesis, whether it came from Stalin or it was Adhikari and others who came to this conclusion. And I say, look, if you say there are oppressed nationalities, then if they are based on language, Sindhis, Bengalis, and the rest, then Punjabis should be an oppressed nationality. But you say Sikhs and Muslims. But we all know that the most oppressed people anywhere in the subcontinent have been Dalits. So why not identify the Dalits also as an oppressed nationality? There is no mention of it. And Adhikari thesis, while not directly supporting the two-nation theory, practically supported it. And the communists joined the Muslim League, and I quote Jinnah on 19th March 1944, his speech in Lahore saying, "You communists, hands off, hands off, hands off. You think we are stupid? Perhaps there is a grain of truth. But I tell you, we have our own Islamic ideology. We don't want any yellow or red-ism." So Jinnah is on record telling the communists, we don't want you in the Muslim League, but they went there and, the Muslim League, mullahs were calling it an Islamic state. The communist Muslims, C.R. Aslam and Abdullah Malik and others, they started using it. Okay, we will get rid of the Hindu moneylender, the Sikh moneylender and all that to give it a class type of character. And so the Adhikari thesis, first of all, if you look at Marx, Engels, Lenin, Stalin, Trotsky, all these great names, they all say that a nation cannot be based on religion. It has to be based on common language, common national character, an economy which can develop, and a common territory. These four. And so the Adhikari thesis identifying Muslims and Sikhs as oppressed nationalities was a negation of Marxist teaching. And in any case, the Sikhs were not demanding a separate state, although there were Sikhs demanding a Khalistani state, of course. So maybe Adhikari had that in mind as well.
Okay.
But what a thing to do. That's it.
Okay. So, given that, what is happening in Pakistan is now not hidden, from the world. So would you,
Sorry?
I'm saying what is happening in Pakistan in terms of, the oppression of all classes of people is
Yeah.
not hidden, from the world, right?
Yes.
Would that thesis, Adhikari thesis, is applicable now in the case of Pakistan, where, the country is reeling under, economic, pressures and, other sorts of pressures also. Would you buy that?
So tell me what you understand. I don't think you understand the Adhikari thesis the way I do.
It talks
Now,
of disintegration, the state breaking into small pieces, and on all those points,
but you know,
a common language, common territory, one army.
no, but he did not. That's what I'm saying.
Okay,
When it came to Muslims and Sikhs,
okay,
he identified them as oppressed nationalities. So
okay,
Adhikari thesis was a major blunder
okay,
because Pakistan is now 96% Muslim.
okay.
But then you are right, they are also uh, linguistic nationalities now fighting one another. But
Yes.
Adhikari had no clue about that.
Okay.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. He was not consistent in
Okay.
his definition of nationalities.
Okay.
When it came to Sikhs and Muslims, he called them oppressed nationalities. All others were linguistic nationalities.
Okay.
And then, if really oppression is the word for a nationality, then tell me, is there any nationality or people more oppressed than the Dalits in
Yeah.
Hindu society,
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
Sikh society, in Muslim society?
Yeah.
So, Adhikari's thesis was makes no sense to me at all, and it doesn't apply to Pakistan
Okay.
because uh, classical Marxism did talk about linguistic nationalities and all, but that's not what Adhikari thesis is. It's a communal thesis.
Okay. Okay. So, sir, I come to the next question, which is I linked, to your book, which is State Ethnicity, which was published in the year 1996. In that
Yeah,
book, you actually make a case that the emerging middle class can potentially be a major local force for, human development, including
yeah,
a concerted political effort to reduce state reliance on coercion and to address
yeah,
inequities across communal, class, and
yeah,
gender lines. Yes, sir.
right.
Yeah. Please, throw some light on this.
Well, I've said that the way the modern world is structured, uh, the state can always defeat internal rebellion. Look at what happened in India. The Khalistan movement was crushed mercilessly. The Kashmir separatist movement was crushed mercilessly.
Hmm.
And in the northeast, whatever attempt has been made have also been crushed. No chance that you can secede from India.
Hmm.
Uh, on the other hand, and because the modern state is strong enough, the classic example which actually proves my theory is uh, Sri Lanka, where the Tamils, who had really created a lot of, armed resistance and so on, were crushed because nobody came to their aid. So my theory has been that the modern state is strong enough to crush internal rebellion. The only time it fails to do that is when a major or a superpower intervenes on behalf of a, a group of people wanting to uh, secede, as happened in the case of East Pakistan, where India intervened and helped the Bengalis break out of Pakistan.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason was that the Pakistan and East Pakistan borders were not contiguous. In between was India, and Pakistan army could not supply men and armament,
Yeah.
and therefore they could not have fought successfully, and Indian intervention helped them become free.
Okay.
But that is not the rule. The rule is internal rebellion doesn't make a case.
Okay.
In Pakistan, the Baloch have been crushed. Uh, any attempt by the Sindhis have been crushed.
Yeah.
But now, of course, the Pakistani state is beset with so many problems
Yeah.
that it can disintegrate. But then the disintegration has to come from within, like the way the Soviet Union collapsed.
Oh,
It's
okay.
not the nationalities who left the Soviet Union, it's the
Yeah.
center which collapsed.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
So Pakistan may disintegrate, but not because uh, the peripheral nationalities are strong enough to do it, because the center may not be able to hold on. So
Okay.
that's another possibility I
Yeah.
also mentioned in my book.
Okay.
I'm saying, short of that, the best thing is to create federal systems where power is fairly shared between an effective center.
Yeah.
Without an effective center, there is no state,
Yeah.
and the provinces,
Yeah.
and equitable sharing of the national resources,
Yeah.
and uh, public intellectuals, the middle class,
Yeah.
and others, the civil society, demanding greater freedom, greater equality, greater resources
Yeah.
for lifting people out of poverty. I think I have a third world social democratic model in mind.
Okay.
A democracy which is also concerned about lifting people out of poverty. So it's not free market economy creating a successful middle class, but also a state giving oppressed people the chance to come up through education, through
Absolutely.
better
Health.
health
Yeah.
facilities, and so on.
Yeah.
Okay?
Agree. So this is, happening in India, maybe at a greater
Yeah, I
pace in the
think
last
in
10
India
years.
it is happening. Yes,
Yeah.
correct. In,
And
in
yeah.
Bangladesh it is happening.
Yes,
Bangladesh
yes,
is happening.
absolutely.
Yes.
There also.
Yeah.
And so, sir, so I come now, to my last question,
Yeah.
which is, linked to your recent visit to India and Pakistan. So you were in India for like 2, 3 months, if I'm correct. You
Yeah.
visited Pune.
Almost 3 months. And
Yeah.
in Pakistan, 2 months and 1 week.
In fact, you gave a lecture at Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics, which is where I have my master's from.
Ah, lovely. Yeah.
So, sir, I come now to one, question, which is, given that your, experience and expertise on, the subject of political science,
Yeah.
if possible, can you identify two pressing social science research questions that any young researcher, can navigate? Yes, sir.
Well, one is the uh, problem of populism, which is, I think, deeply undermining democracy uh, in the subcontinent. I think populism is a very dangerous phenomenon. It is pseudo democracy. It's like majoritarianism,
Mhm.
and one has to go back and find the proper balance between uh, you know the freedom of individuals
Mhm.
and the right of uh, large or majority groups and minority groups to continue with their sort of uh, different uh, uh, identities, and not merging into one nation of
Mhm.
free individuals.
Mhm.
And I think the Uniform Civil Code, uh, I find the leftist people not really understanding that it could be something good for everyone in India.
Yeah.
So a number of political science things have to be undertaken. What sort of state creates a fair, open system in which minorities feel free and the majority feels confident to rule according to the rules of the game, which is the
Yeah.
constitution?
Yeah.
And when it comes to Pakistan,
Yeah,
everything has to be done from the scratch.
yeah,
Pakistan cannot be compared with India in that sense.
yeah.
So
But still,
one
sir,
has to
any one,
yeah,
major issue that you think that needs to be taken care of in Pakistan? There are plenty, but if you have
of
to
course,
identify,
I think in bringing religion into politics, into law, into constitution, that must be critically examined. It has done so much harm to Pakistan that I can't tell you. So, trying to create a Pakistan in the light of the real or imagined experience of the 7th century is a disastrous undertaking. So,
Hmm.
somebody has to do that, and I've already my doctoral thesis called The Concept of an Islamic State, an analysis of the ideological controversy in Pakistan, is already a contribution in that direction. I have
Okay,
not seen anyone pursue it
okay.
afterwards.
So if
Yeah.
anyone were to get your thesis, where can they go to? Is it available
Try,
online?
we are now going to have it republished very soon. So just wait for a
Oh,
short
great.
while and I'll let you know. Okay?
Great. Yeah, yeah. Thank you, sir. Any other last point, Professor, you might
No,
want?
I think we needed to discuss these things, and I'm very glad I was able to explain my position on Marxism.
Yeah,
Uh, I say any philosophy, any way of thinking which becomes a dogma
yeah,
ultimately defeats the purpose of free thought.
yeah,
And Marxism or no Marxism, the basic thing is that people should be treated fairly
yeah,
and they should be helped get out of poverty. There should be
yeah,
the rule of law
yeah,
and gender equality. All this is important.
yeah,
And it doesn't happen just through the armed revolution. A
yeah,
peaceful way to a better society is also possible. And
yeah,
that's where I think we have to keep our options open all the time.
absolutely. So I, end this with this line that you have in your website. Treat others the way you want to be treated.
Yes,
Yeah,
this is a categorical imperative that I should treat others
yeah,
with respect, not as a tactic, but as a duty.
absolutely.
And and the principle is I should not treat others in a way I don't want them to treat me.
Yeah,
Simple
absolutely.
as that.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, sir. It was such a learning experience over this last, 60 minutes, getting
I'm
educated.
glad we
Yeah.
had this opportunity. Thank you, Manhar Singh.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you very much, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. And I wish the same for you. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.